Hey, my name is Ryan Shannon. I am a clinical mental health counseling student at Marshall University, and I'm currently practicing as a certified counselor in Washington State. So, today I wanted to talk about fostering education in a counseling practice, since higher education is linked with a slew of benefits. So, let's dig into it. What are the benefits? Well, you might be able to increase your lifespan and health span, decrease criminal behavior, crime, and delinquency, increase your IQ, boost human capital, including social outcomes and societal stability, increase favorable outcomes in offspring, earn a higher salary, and lessen psychological issue propensity. So, in other words, you'll probably have better mental health. So, how do we foster higher education in our clients? First of all, it's important to preface that not everybody is destined to earn a PhD or even a master's or an associate's degree. It's important to adapt higher education goals to the client and to the individual. There are three important methods that I would like to touch on. The first is motivational interviewing, next, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then finally, Adlerian or individual psychology. Okay, interviewing, let's get into it. So basically, this was founded by William Miller, who posited that, okay, people don't like to be told what to do. I think that most of us can think back to our childhood, and if our parents told us to clean our rooms, we probably were a little bit reluctant and pushed back. So that's kind of the idea here. Um, Stephen Rolnick said, the more you try to insert information and advice into others, the more they tend to back off and resist. So that's just kind of the idea. It was mostly used for addictions. However, it's also incredibly beneficial for people who are reluctant to change and ambivalent. And for those of us with a background in psychology or counseling, we're probably familiar with the stages of change model. The first stage is the pre-contemplation stage. Next is contemplation, then planning, action, and finally maintenance. So, what are some of the core concepts in motivational interviewing? So, the first thing to know is OARS. That stands for open ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarizing. So, you'll notice that two of these four components are found in counseling. They are made up of the micro skills of counseling. Um, I guess you could also consider open-ended questions a part of the micro skills of counseling as well. Um, so basically, the idea is to not instruct your clients and kind of tell them what to do, but rather affirm them when they make positive steps in the right direction, to ask open-ended questions that allow the client to really talk themselves into change, and to listen reflectively and summarize so that the client really feels heard and understood rather than prodded. What are the key processes? So you got to engage, which means build rapport, focus. So collaboratively identify the key issue. For example, in this particular case, somebody might say, I just don't feel like I'm cut from the right cloth. I'm not, I'm a first generation student. I feel like I'm not destined for college. Well, that would be one of the key issues you might address as a therapist. And then evoking. You allow the client to talk themselves into change. Let them describe their emotions and strategies to change without really interjecting. And finally, planning. So you got to make actionable steps that you'd come up with collaboratively with the client. Okay, so let's get into ORs here. Let me give you some concrete examples on how you can use this in your therapy practice. So, open ended questions. It's what do you want to do next? Not don't you want to go to university after high school? So, we want to refrain from leading questions like this. And we also want to avoid responses that have yes or no answers. What makes you think it might be a good time to go back to school? That's a good question. It's open. And it's not, is it a good time to go back to school? So another good example, can you walk me through your decision to delay enrollment and not, isn't it a better time to enroll now? So that's the gist of open-ended questions. So affirmations, like, wow, that's so awesome that you read through the community college's course catalog. That might seem like a small step to some people, just, oh, they read through a course catalog, but we really want to emphasize small positive actions, no matter how minuscule they may seem. So another example is, wow, I'm so proud of you for enrolling in honors biology. I know that eventually you want to major in biology in college. Things like that. You really want to be encouraging. Reflective listening. So again, if you're familiar with micro-counseling, you probably have a solid foundation. So some examples of this are, I hear that you have mixed feelings about going to college. On one hand, X, but on the other hand, Y. Let's say that a client comes in and they're saying, oh, my mom is just nagging me about, completing the common application for university. So you might say, well, it seems that your mom is concerned about your future. And then summaries are great for linking to previous things the client stated and to close topics before moving on. So here is a sample, like a mock dialogue here. I'll skip over that just in the interest of time. You can read over it. Cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is an evidence-based practice, and as therapists or future therapists, we should probably all be familiar with CBT. It's found to be effective for depression, anxiety, and so on and so on, for many different areas of life, and many serious mental health disorders, but also just for general stress. Um, so many of our clients who are considering enrolling in college are probably, they might be stressed out by that situation and that decision. So CBT can really come in handy. Um, so basically, the idea of CBT is that we all have faulty thoughts, and because of our maladaptive cognitions about the world and our kind of flawed, skewed beliefs, this this allows for automatic thoughts and somatic reactions to pop up in our bodies. And so through CBT, we become aware of those automatic thoughts, and we basically program ourselves with more adaptive thoughts, which leads to more adaptive behaviors. And that's kind of the idea behind cognitive restructuring. So we test and challenge the validity of our maladaptive cognitions. So touching on that previous example that I mentioned earlier about, some client walking through your doors and saying, oh, I'm just not, I'm a first generation college student. I don't know if it's the right fit for me. Well, you would challenge that and then hopefully replace that thought with something a bit more adaptive so that they are less frightened by the idea of applying to universities. So some core CBT components to know about. You've got your core beliefs and then your intermediary beliefs. Your core beliefs are like just typically simple sentences. And some maladaptive ones would be like, oh, I'm stupid. College is too difficult for me. Intermediary beliefs are attitudes, rules, and assumptions that derive from these simpler core beliefs. So, for example, somebody who has a core belief that says that they're stupid um, might then develop a maladaptive intermediary belief that says, well, since I didn't get 100% on my exam, I'm a complete idiot. Um, oh, I've just never been a good test taker. When in reality, they're discounting the fact that, hey, on that last exam, maybe they got an 85%, 90%. Um, so there are a slew of common cognitive distortions, such as filtering, where we focus a little too much on the negative, and we really discount the positive. Then we have black and white thinking, which is kind of an all or nothing attitude. If I don't get 95 or higher on this exam, I'm a complete idiot. I'm a failure. Things like that. That's black and white. Overgeneralizing is when we rely on a single event or kind of a one single sample, and then we draw wide conclusions from it. So let's say that we take our first college class and we don't do as good as we thought that we would. And then we just say, oh, a terrible college student altogether. It's like, well, you might want to give it some time because in your future classes, you might do a lot better than your first. Then there are other ones, including jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, minimizing. It's when you downplay your positive qualities, and personalization. So this is important. How do you apply CBT when it comes to clients who are looking to advance their education? Well, let's look at this example here. So somebody walks through your doors, whether in person or virtually, and they go, "Oh, I just got rejected from my bachelor's program." What do you say? How do you implement cognitive restructuring in this instance? Well, you would have the client identify their emotions. Okay, tell me more about how you feel. The client then says, "Oh, I feel hopeless and worthless." You would then ask them to rate how intense that feeling is from 0 to 100%. Let's say the client says they rate hopelessness at 70% and worthlessness at 60%. Okay, so we roll with it and then we ask the client, what are your automatic thoughts? What are you telling yourself when you feel these emotions? The client then says, I'll never get into college. That's what I'm thinking about. I should just give up. I've embarrassed myself and my family. Okay, so we've identified those automatic thoughts. Then what? So the client then rates how believable each statement is from 0 to 100%. And you see here on the slide that the highest rated, meaning the most believable statement, was I've embarrassed myself and my family at 90%. So this is the thought that the client thinks is most believable. And the most believable thought, the one that's rated the highest, is the hot thought. So then we ask the client, okay, where's your proof? You think this thought, now come on, let's find reasons for and against it. So some reasons for might be, well, they actually didn't get into the school they wanted, and then the client was told that they didn't meet admissions requirements. So that supports the idea that, oh, I've embarrassed myself and my family. Now against would be, my family told me that they're proud of me regardless, and that I was encouraged to apply after meeting requirements by admissions officers. So the client then evaluates the evidence for and against and comes up with an alternative thought that's a bit more adaptive, more positive, something more constructive. Well, just because I wasn't accepted doesn't mean my family isn't proud. I can apply again later. That's the thought that the client comes up with after assessing the reasons for and against the hot thought. So finally, after they come up with an alternative thought, the client's asked to re-rate their emotions. And he originally said that he felt 70% hopeless. Now it drops to 20%. Similarly, there was a drop in worthlessness. It drops to just 10% after coming up with this more constructive alternative thought. So here is a mock dialogue here. The client says, only people with A's go to college. I don't have the grades. The therapist would reply, so you must have perfect A's to go to college. And he goes, well, I guess not. My cousin got C's and is going to college. Okay, so then the therapist really reflects maybe a bit bluntly that your belief was black and white. What can you tell yourself instead? The client responds, I guess I can go to college without perfect grades after all. Okay, now we're going to dive into Adlerian or individual psychology. Basically, the basics of Adlerian is that it's kind of a holistic approach. It's more of an orientation than something that can be applied, although there are applicable methods. There's a subjective nature to living. So basically, we all develop our own private logic. There's a cognitive nature to Adlerian psychology, and it also integrates other modalities like existential humanistic, systemic, and psychodynamic. The key tenets are basically that childhood is important and there is some degree of determinism, but as adults, or adolescents, we still can control our lives today. While biology and our environment do influence who we are today, we still have incredible sway over our current behavior and thoughts. Humans are also driven by inferiority, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. When we perceive ourselves as being inferior, we tend to strive for perfection, or we strive to learn and grow so that we overcome our inferiorities. And finally, encouragement is a big component of individual psychology, and um, we are social beings who strive to connect with other people. So, as I mentioned, there's a strong component of social interest. We also have purposeful conduct, meaning that we develop a private logic that drives our behavior subconsciously. Um, and finally, there's this fictional finalism where we unconsciously work toward an idealized fictional self that we create in childhood based on our inferiorities. There are a variety of techniques, including encouragement, asking the question, which you might be familiar with when it comes to short term uh, therapies, and then acting as if, push button technique, and lifestyle assessment. So I wanted to touch on one technique in particular, which is the push button technique. It's where clients are asked to push a button, they push it again, and then for a third time. So in this first phase, they remember something in vivid detail that's pleasant. You can almost turn it into a meditative activity. So, for example, they might remember the very first time that they got an A on their report card way back in elementary school. Okay, you ask the client, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Who are you with? They might tell you, my mom told me this and she had a huge smile on her face. Next, we go into something a bit unpleasant. So the client remembers a time when maybe a teacher made the client feel unworthy or that they weren't smart. So we would go into that, and the client would feel all the feelings, hear the sounds, focus on the sensations in the body as if it were happening now. The goal is to really feel it actively and presently. And then finally, the client would touch on a different pleasant memory in the third phase. So maybe they do remember a time that they attended a career fair and they felt really drawn to a particular thing and they felt motivated to pursue it. Okay, so then they remember that in vivid detail. And it goes to show that we have tremendous power over our current emotional state. So here's a mock dialogue, which in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over. What populations might you work with? Well, you probably use these strategies with high school juniors and seniors, people who are unemployed, people who are changing careers, older adults, lifelong learners, first generation college students, and those who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Some important things to remember. You got to remember finances. College in the US can be expensive. It might not be in the client's best interest to push them to pursue a degree that costs $40,000 a year when their anticipated salary is only, I don't know, $50,000. So it's got to be realistic. Intellectual aptitude has got to be taken into an account as well. If your client is not cognitively high functioning, it might not be a good idea to push them to become a doctor, for example. And then you also have to remind them that education attainment may lead to increased acute stress, but over the long run, it will tend to abate those stressors and lead to better mental health. Finally, consider non-traditional programs, such as programs that are online or maybe hybrid. And you might also consider boot camps or certificate programs rather than a degree. And then this is just for reference here, the college disciplines and their their projected salaries, just so clients have a solid understanding of what they're getting themselves into, especially, as I said, since tuition in the US can be quite spendy. You probably want to make sure that it pays off. And that's it. Here are the references. Thank you for listening.